Shannon, when I say the word Tevis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
The essence of the Tevis to me is soul stirring. It really moves my spirit. And there's just decades of memories that just flood together in this wash of magic that it's just so inspirational. And it always comes back to Wendell Roby for me. So that's what Tevis is about for me. It takes people to places where I always call it, when you finish the Tevis, it's like walking through the mirror. And you can't really explain that to somebody who's never done it. Yeah. It's a magic place. And, you know, that point to point, starting up in the mountains, ending in Auburn, crossing the Sierra, they crossed the mountains, you know. It's an amazing feat. And then I went off to a school called the Pacific Coast Equestrian Research Farm, run by Wentworth and Linda Tellington. And as all they could talk about was the Tevis Cup ride. Riding your horse 100 miles in one day.
I'd like to maybe start just by talking about Wentworth, because he was an amazing horseman himself.
He was a, you know, oh gosh, where do you start with him? He had a pack string up in Canada where he would rent out 50, 60 horses at a time to the oil prospectors up in Alberta, you know. So he kept these huge herds of horses, and he knew how to look at a horse, and he'd just go this, that, and the other thing, you know. He knew exactly how to pick horses that would withstand this rigorous activity. And then he also, he went to great schools, and he was in the East. He was from New Hampshire. He was a teacher at West Point. Yeah. At the time where they had the last graduating class with the U.S. Cavalry methodology of horsemanship. So he was just an excellent horseman.
You were saying that they were doing a lot of clinics and trying to encourage good horsemanship with the long distance riding, with endurance.
Yes.
And that people would come from all over the place,
right,
you know, to learn more about distance riding from Went and Linda.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who understands endurance riding, once they fall for it, they would travel to the miles to go to a ride. So that included, they started doing these symposiums at the research farm in Badger, California. It was a 365-acre ranch that they had there. And so they would do endurance symposiums. This is way before AERC got started. So who would come to those? Phil Gardner, Pat Fitzgerald, Cliff Lewis, Ed Johnson, and with Bezetol, and all sorts of people. Roe Bailey was there. You know, there's a lot of people that got their roots nourished at the research farm. 69 was my first Tevis, and I rode a horse named Big Red, you know, a slaughter pen thoroughbred horse. I had no clue what I was getting into. Didn't have a clue. And I didn't know what to drink or eat or anything. I don't recommend just drinking coffee all day. No. But anyway, I did not finish that year. I got as far as Todd Valley. And
oh, you were close.
Cold. When you don't finish, you learn probably more than when you do finish. So that went in the learned more category. Then that following year, I just trained for the Tevis. I said, damn it, I'm going to get that buckle. So I went through all the gyrations, and by that time it was Phil Gardner, Shannon, and Rick and Lori Stewart, and the four of us rode all the time, and Phil was our mentor. And so I got my first Tevis buckle in 1977. So what happened in 1977? There were about 13, 14 runners
Oh yeah.
with the Tevis because Gordy, as Chuck mentioned earlier, Gordy ran in 74,
Cowman in 76.
Cowman in 76, 77, there's 14 runners. And I'm going down through Volcano Canyon, and there's Andy Gonzalez,
Yep.
this dark stranger, you know, and he's running along, and we're kind of going like this, and I'm going through Volcano Canyon, and I said, this run is going to be a hit, and I'm going to make sure it is. So I started working at the Hart Federal Savings, which was Mecca for the endurance riding sport. The break room was just constantly filled with training your horses, how you do this, how you do on the ride, what ride are you going to, you know, the whole thing. So it just took off. Well, then the phone started ringing, and people were calling to see about this run.
Yeah.
Well, nobody else cared about it except me, so I fielded all those calls. This was in the 70s.
There was something about that number, 100, that really infatuated not just riders, but then runners.
Right.
Where all of a sudden went 100 miles.
Yeah,
And it just seemed like so far, but it was possible.
Right.
And that was
Right.
Wendell that said,
That's
this is
right.
possible.
And Gordy, you know, said,
and then Gordy said,
showed
I
us.
can run it.
And you know, people were in awe of this, and we were able to have the support of Wendell and Drew, and I don't know if you really know what that felt like, but it was magnificent.
Yeah.
You know, it was magnificent for him to say, you know, go enjoy this trail that I've created, you know, that I've pruned back the bushes for you and marked it, and you know, which he did in the early 30s.
And established it.
And
which took,
established
you know,
it, yeah.
it took somebody like Wendell to be able to do that.
And it all came from his passion
Yes.
of the pioneer. You drive down to my place and get that radar horse out of the pasture, come up and ride with Shannon. And so he did. We rode to Robinson Flat and had a marvelous day. But that was it. But that was
it. For
that
both
was,
you and Jerry, or
that,
for
yeah, we quit there.
Yeah.
But that was Wendell Roby's last ride out on the trail.
Yeah.
So we, you know, were sort of herding him in as he was bailing off the, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I heard the story that, and I know there's probably lots of stories, different stories about that, but he snuck up there, not telling his wife, and he you know, just entered the ride, and nobody could tell him not to.
Yeah.
And he was just determined to get one last ride in.
He had.
I might do that myself one day.
Yeah, he had several guys from the, you know, that worked for him at Hart Federal. They're helping him crew for him, and they were. I mean, you gotta admire his grit. I mean, this all goes back to that endurance thing that I saw when I was 5 years old. And, you know, this tenacious attitude of you can do this, and so he fell off the horse, and they had to put him. You know, it was not that pretty, but. So they got him into Roby Point, and the guys had him over here, and the horse was over there, and they said, Wendell, your horse is lame, he can't go on.
However it worked out, we're able to be with the right people at the right times.
I was fortunate, that's for sure.
to get to know, you know, the pioneers of our sport.
Yeah.
And now you're an author. And you're writing books to save our history and to preserve it in print, and so your first book was Strike a Long Trot, and that's a book about Linda Tellington Jones
with a lot of Tevis history.
Oh well, it has to have that,
Yeah.
and about Went, which is always very fun to read about.
Yeah.
So where do you want to see The run, it has its own thing now.
The
It's
run,
going in its own direction, but
my
the ride
child,
itself,
the run has taken off.
it's taken
yeah.
off, and it's going in all different. I mean, it's just it's a world class event.
Can I mention one thing about that? How we made that happen is, you know, here Wendell taught us to love the Sierra. This is your oyster, enjoy it. When people started coming to the run, I was like, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love this, and we're gonna embrace you in a big hug, and you are now part of the Western States family.
Right.
Because you showed an inkling of interest in what this trail, what this event, what we love. You're part of it now, you know, and we just kept growing that. And now the run is huge.
Oh.
And I must tell you that years ago, I was standing out in the parking lot at Hart Federal talking to Jim Larimer, who was in, and I said to him early on, I said, you know, the run's going to get much bigger than the ride. And he says, no way, never, the ride. And I said, you just wait and see.
Yeah.
You know, and there were over 4,200 entries in the lottery to take like 260 entries last year.
I grew up very, I mean, that was embedded in me as a young endurance rider. Do you feel that to finish is to win is still applicable?
Absolutely.
To the endurance in the 21st century?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to include everybody. I mean, I know that they have a lot more awards and things like that for the top finishers, but anybody, I mean, anybody that finishes at 4 o'clock in the morning, or, you know, 5:15 in the morning, and that's a win, you know.
Well, I mean, you're wearing your Tevis buckle this evening.
Yeah.
I have my Tevis
Right.
buckle on, and that's what we won. You know, that was what we went for. Was
Internationally
we wanted that finish
recognized,
with,
you know,
with that buckle.
Yeah, and another thing about when somebody, you got a buckle. They don't ask you what was your time?
What place you came in.
What place you, nobody, you got a buckle.
Right.
That's a winning situation. In 1978, when I was talking to Wendell Roby, I said, Wendell, I think Auburn should be the endurance capital of the world.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, that's funny. You know, well, it took until 2001 for that to actually happen, thanks to Harvey Roper. And I was in the Tevis office, working in the Tevis office at the time, and he called and said, have you ever heard of this? And I said, oh, yeah, let's do it. And so we went to the city council. We made it happen.
So thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you, and it's good to see you.
Nice to see you, dear.